we've got to talk about the big breakup, the one between Virginia and West Virginia that occurred during the American Civil War. Now, even though the split wasn't official until 1863, trouble had been brewing for a long, long time. In fact, since the very beginning of Virginia statehood. So let's back up to the Virginia Constitution of 1776, which allowed for disproportional Eastern political representation and placed property holding qualifications on voters. Also, many felt that the tax code benefited slaveholders and large landowners, and that Virginia wasn't really prioritizing putting state money toward improvements on the western side of the state. So, in 1816 and in 1825, constitutional conventions were held in Staunton, during which Western politicians attempted to secure promises of reform, but they were pretty slow in coming. So in 1850, they called for another constitutional convention. And this time, Eastern Virginia did make some concessions, like granting suffrage to all white males, regardless of land ownership. But, unfortunately, this was not enough to quell the dissatisfaction. In the East, large plantations and commercial agriculture were fueled by slave labor. In the West, industries like coal and salt, iron and oil were built on free labor. Now, I do not mean to say that slavery didn't exist in Western Virginia. It did. But it was nowhere even close to the scale of it in Eastern Virginia. So as you can imagine, anti-slavery sentiments begin to mount in the West, fueled largely by these very disparate economic systems. But a couple of things happened that really, really inflamed this sectional divide. First, the Dred Scott decision. In 1846, Dred Scott, an enslaved black man, and his wife Harriet sued for their freedom, arguing that they had been taken by their enslaver to Wisconsin, which was a free territory, before returning to a slave state. Now, there was legal precedent for them winning this case. However, it goes all the way to the Supreme Court, and the court rules against them. On March 6th, 1857, Chief Justice Roger Taney summarizes the court's findings that enslaved people are not citizens of the United States, and therefore they are not entitled to legal protection. Furthermore, the court declares that Congress does not have the power to ban slavery in a federal territory. So another inciting incident is John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry. So in October of 1859, he and a band of his followers attack the United States arsenal in an attempt to spark a slave revolt in the southern states. Eastern Virginia and the South in general take umbrage at this, many seeing this as the domineering North blatantly attacking their cherished traditions. Now, Western Virginia and people in the North have mixed feelings. For some, Brown is an abolitionist hero, and for others, he is a dangerous extremist, but most do agree that somehow, some way, slavery has got to come to an end. The big event, though, is the election of Abraham Lincoln to the presidency in 1860. Right away, 7 southern states secede from the Union. Now, Virginia is a little later to the secession game, but eventually, in the spring of 1861, Governor John Letcher calls for a convention. On April 17th, Virginia's Ordinance of Secession passes among the delegates. It should be noted that almost 2/3 of those who voted against secession are from Western Virginia. The ordinance essentially says that Virginia repeals its ratification of the U.S. Constitution in 1788. Okay, so as a result of Virginia's Ordinance of Secession, anti-secession conventions start popping up all over Western Virginia. A notable one is led by one John Carlisle in Clarksburg. It results in the Clarksburg Resolutions, which absolutely denounce secession and call for another convention to address this. So, in May of 1861, delegates of the First Wheeling Convention agree to work together to convince Virginians to vote against the Ordinance of Secession and to reconvene if their work proves unsuccessful, if the ordinance passes the general vote. It does. On May 23rd, 1861, Virginia's citizens vote overwhelmingly in favor of the Ordinance of Secession. And that is when things start to escalate. Right away, Major General George McClellan invades northwestern Virginia with the goal being to keep the area and the railroad under Union control. But by this time, Western Virginia wants to stand on its own. This is tricky, though. According to Article 4, Section 3 of the U.S. Constitution, new states may be admitted by the Congress into the Union, but no new state shall be formed or erected within the jurisdiction of any other state, nor any state be formed by the junction of two or more states or parts of states without the consent of the legislatures of the states concerned, as well as the Congress. Basically, Western Virginia can't become a new state without Eastern Virginia's approval. And there is no way that Virginia, now a member of the Confederacy, is going to grant that. So, the leaders of Western Virginia get creative here. The Second Wheeling Convention meets in June of 1861 and passes an ordinance for the reorganization of state government. This essentially declares that all state offices have been willfully abandoned by Virginia Confederates, requiring the government to reorganize under new leadership. So Francis Pierpont, he is a lawyer from Marion County, is elected governor of the restored Virginia government. Then, in August, just a few months later, the Wheeling Convention reassembles. They write and approve an ordinance to form a new state, one which they originally call Kanawha, and which originally consists of 48 counties. So on October 24th, 1861, Western Virginians vote in favor of the statehood ordinance. But the next step is a state constitution. So in November of 1861, the delegates meet in Wheeling again. They change the new state's name from Kanawha to West Virginia, and they tack on 5 more counties. Most notably, they take on the slavery issue. So, how will this new state handle slavery? Well, they write into the Constitution a policy which they call Negro exclusion, which means that no black person, whether enslaved or free, can live in the future state of West Virginia. And in February 1862, the delegates approve the Constitution. And in April of 1862, voters in Western Virginia do so as well. But remember Article 4, Section 3 of the U.S. Constitution, which says a new state can only be formed with the permission of the current state? So on May 6th, Francis Pierpont, governor of the restored state of Virginia, officially agrees to the dismemberment of Virginia. Basically, Western Virginia declares itself the true Virginia so that it can give itself permission to become the new state of West Virginia. Now, this raises an interesting question. If Virginia seceded from the Union in order to join the Confederacy, and West Virginia seceded from Virginia, is West Virginia technically the only state to secede from the Confederacy? So all of this is happening at the state or almost state level. But what about at the federal level? On May 29, 1862, in Congress, Senator Waitman Willie introduces the idea of a new state. And then Senator John Carlisle goes to the Committee on Territories and drafts the West Virginia Statehood Bill. Now, lots of debate ensues, both at the state level and the federal level, over the proposed state's policy on slavery and its county boundaries. Petitions both for and against inclusion from counties like Berkeley and Jefferson show that these citizens were really divided over this. But on July 4th, Senator Willey puts forward the Willey Amendment, a revised statehood bill that drops a few counties, drops the horrible Negro exclusion policy, and provides for gradual emancipation. A few days later, the West Virginia statehood bill is passed by the U.S. Senate, and a few months later, it's passed by the House of Representatives. But you need to know this. It is not yet a done deal. President Lincoln is in a quandary, and so is his cabinet. They're asking themselves, is this even constitutional? Lincoln writes, "It is said that the admission of West Virginia is secession, and tolerated only because it is our secession." Well, if we call it by that name, there is still difference enough between secession against the Constitution and secession in favor of the Constitution. I believe that the admission of West Virginia into the Union is expedient. Now, Francis Pierpont is writing to Lincoln, "We entreat you, for the cause of the country, not to hesitate to sign this bill. Its failure will ruin the Union cause in Western Virginia." Now, likewise, Archibald Campbell, he is writing to Lincoln, and he is the editor of the Wheeling Intelligencer, and he is saying that vetoing the West Virginia statehood bill would destroy Union sentiments in Western Virginia. Basically, he's saying either we become a separate state or this whole area will end up reverting to the Confederacy. Well, on December 31st, 1862, Lincoln signs the West Virginia statehood bill. And as soon as he hears that the revised state constitution has gotten the thumbs up from the voters, Lincoln announces that on June 20th, 1863, West Virginia will officially become a state. Arthur Borman, he's from Wood County, he is voted the very first governor of the brand new state, and on June 20th, 1863, he is given the honor of declaring West Virginia to be the 35th state in the United States of America. Now, even though the state's constitution did call for gradual emancipation, on February 3rd, 1865, just 3 days after it passes in Congress, West Virginia votes to ratify the 13th Amendment, which calls for the immediate abolishment of slavery within the state. Now, I said all of that to say this. West Virginia statehood is a complicated process, one that was a long time coming, one that started long before the American Civil War. And even after the war ended, statehood still wasn't a done deal. During Reconstruction, a flood of former Confederates seek government positions, hoping to undermine the new state and even force the legal reunification of West Virginia and Virginia. This fight makes it all the way to the United States Supreme Court. And in 1871, the case of Virginia versus West Virginia, the court rules that if a governor is granted oversight of an election, the state legislature is bound to honor the outcome of it. This essentially affirms that the restored government of Virginia had the right to give Western Virginia permission to split from Eastern Virginia. As such, it's settled once and for all that West Virginia is a sovereign state, the 35th star in the Union, and some would say the only state to declare both its independence from the Confederacy and its allegiance to the Union.